school bus one, I'm testifying on the motel one. Karen Medeiros, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities. It was actually the Alliance that went to Channel 12. We were doing research over the summer, reviewing the sex offender registry, the registration, the monitoring, the notifications, and the problems that we saw, and this was one of them. So there were about half a dozen sex offenders in motels that we found. At that time, East Providence, we did hear from the East Providence residents after the segment was run. That was Anthony Stravato. He not only was a level 3 sex offender, but he was notorious for being known and engaging in satanical rituals and cat killing. Needless to say, I can understand why the community was extremely upset. I had neighbors whose property abutted the motel. We find this unacceptable. I just want to tell you, this isn't new, this type of bill. Representative Bradley Jones in Massachusetts passed a similar bill on public housing and state subsidized housing in hotels and motels. I totally would support the fact that you wouldn't want to keep them for long periods of time. I understand it being a transitional type of thing. I don't really like that. I think our notification system obviously has a lot of flaws in it. I know for myself in Cranston, we were notified in one building in an apartment complex. I was notified on the 3rd floor. My tenant on the 2nd floor was notified, but the tenant with a baby who was pregnant on the 1st floor was never notified of a level 3 sex offender that was located right near Lima's house. So we've got a lot of problems, people, with the sex offender registry, notification and monitoring of sex offenders that we're going to be looking at this year, and you'll see in some of my other bills. And I support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. You were signed up on 5724. If you want, it's up to you.
Which one is that?
That's Representative Sullivan's bill about the 1,000 feet.
Bus stop, yeah, I would support that as well. It's very difficult. When I testified on the mandatory registration of sex offenders in the Senate last year, which happened to pass the Senate unanimously, it was interesting that one of the senators spoke about the fact that he was engaged in a bus tour group where you can't, where you're, what am I looking for? The word I'm looking for when you're all jumping in. What?
Carpooling?
Yeah, carpooling. One of the senators was actually involved in carpooling children because they were concerned of the number of sex offenders that increased at the bus stop area. So, again, this just goes back to we really got to start looking at monitoring, registration, notification, and making some changes. Incremental steps, people. It has to get done, or we're going to see more and more problems increase, and God forbid we'll see some cases that are going to be really ugly. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Representative Knight has a question for you.
Representative Knight? My button's already on.
I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Carolyn Medeiros, the Executive Director of the Alliance for Safe Communities.
Carolyn, are you aware that in our state, the law as it stands today provides for both registration and community notification?
Yes.
And that those are two separate and distinct activities of government?
Yes.
Do you have a particular problem with any sort of aspects of the registration law, or are you particularly concerned in your testimony today with community notification?
Later in another bill, I'll be expressing my concerns with the registration process. That is under Bill 5207, where we saw problems where there weren't 20 sex offenders with no addresses on the registry at all. And some that were listed, one listed as living in the woods near Cedar Mill. That's totally unacceptable. When people go to the registry, they expect to see John Smith in Cranston and an address, not living near the Econo Lodge parking lot.
Well,
So that part and notification as well, I have issues with. Because as I expressed myself, my own personal experience, a mother with a baby and pregnant on the 1st floor didn't get notified, but yet 2 of us above her did get notified, a level 3 sex offender right next to us.
Would you agree with me that the primary responsibility for community notification lies with local police departments?
unless it's a shelter, and then I believe that the burden falls upon the shelter as well. They have to notify law enforcement for law enforcement to notify the community, which is in the bill, another bill tonight. Thank you, Brett.
Any further questions for Carolyn? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Keeble.
Pam, Cheryl on Representative Kazarian's bill.
Thank you, Chairman. This is on Bill 5207. I give you all packets. This bill's been amended 1, 2, possibly 3 times. I didn't hear from Crossroads, but I believe the most current amendment is by midnight you have, correct? Are you aware of that?
Once by midnight.
Well, hang
Yes.
on. We're not, witnesses do not ask each other questions.
All right.
I will ask her when she
It's
comes
by
up.
midnight. It's been amended, it's brought to my attention.
Okay, when she comes up, I'll ask.
Okay, so it's been amended to midnight, which is ample time. Having been a director in juvenile reentry for Connecticut, Mass, and Rhode Island, and actually had to conduct a procedure of an intake when a juvenile came to the facility, this was a paramount exercise that you were responsible for. You not only went through their belongings, went through their file, but if any notifications had to be made to police, staff was done. That was your responsibility. If you didn't do it, you lost your job. And you had a child that was at risk. He was at risk to himself, or she was at risk to the population in your shelter. And in this case with adults, they're wandering the community from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. They're at risk to the community as well. So an onus on the shelter, I believe, is already existent. To ask Crossroads to do this is not beyond the boundaries of their capabilities, I'm afraid. Okay, so this bill was introduced last year. And it started with the Bruce Petey case. You have his criminal record there as you go page by page. 2 rapes, 3 rapes, if you consider an inmate as well. A CO put in the hospital, multiple B&Es, and larceny. There have been changes, and things have gotten a little better with Crossroads running the shelter, okay? But what's been going on in comparison to when House of Hope ran it last year hasn't exactly exuded confidence in the alliance or the community or the representative in that area. When you look at incidents such as one of their residents, Gary Ramsey, who's video upskirting women at Kennedy Plaza, and he's a resident of Harrington Hall, then he's free to wander all day on the bus lines and do wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. I don't know if that's a program there or not. And then you look at another incident where Carlos Natal is out wanted, possibly in Providence with a girlfriend, also a resident of Harrington Hall, both high-level sex offenders. You know, you have a letter in the packet from the Cranston Public Library and how the community's been affected. I totally understand, Representative Almeida, what you're saying. We're going to get to your community and your concerns, because I totally support your issues. I totally get what you're saying. So the library, you're going to see a letter there. They've had rescue and fire runs and police runs, and they're concerned about sex offenders coming in and out of there. I myself have witnessed some, because I'm very familiar with many of the sex offenders in this state. It's one of the specialties that we unfortunately address at the Alliance, going in and out of the library. So they're hyper-vigilant. They had a binder about that effect. That was for the year. This year, they had to keep monitoring. They had their librarians monitoring. The cost, and police and fire and rescue runs this past 4 months was about $55,000 with 40-some rescue runs, $1,200 for basic life support and $1,500 for advanced life support. That doesn't include Cranston PD that goes there and state police. We're talking high-level, very dangerous sex offenders that are being held in there, okay? And numbers that exceed any other area or district in this state. Level 3s, repeat offenders. If we're merging these bills and we're looking at 5159, good. We start to see what's called a clustering pattern, okay? Cranston is pretty much the epicenter of sex offenders. If you go to your clustering packet that I gave you, you have plenty of time on your own to go through those packets. And you were all given a map, right? Geographical Google Earth map. And you'll see Cranston has, some 30, when this was done in November, of sex offenders at Harrington Hall. Providence is overwhelmed as well, with clusters of 8, clusters of 4, look at the map. So I totally understand what the rep is saying regarding his concerns in South Providence. You look at the breakdown, you'll see the breakdown of the clusters, how many. We consider a cluster 2 or more sex offenders living in the same residence or on the same street. So when you look at the clusters, you can see a cluster and the sex offender population. I have it broken down for you. I have a written version of just how high the levels are at the Howard Ave shelter. And by the way, when you're mixing sex offenders with mentally ill, with drug addicted, the unique needs of each client is not being met. It's impossible. Yes, I'm not in conflict with Crossroads over giving them more resources to do what they need to do. Sex offenders are a special and unique population. Drug addicted people are a special and unique population. Mentally ill are a special and unique population. To think that you can put all these individuals in a building, 80 of them, and it's going to be a kumbaya, and everything's going to run smoothly, and put the burden on their staff, no matter how many they have or how many more you're going to give them, is really unreasonable. So you have to start to think about rethinking how we're handling what I said earlier this evening, registration, monitoring, and whatnot. There are 6 states, and you'll see the reports of the police runs there. You'll see the reports of the state police runs there. You'll see on 2/4/2017, there were 166 results of level 2 and level 3 sex offenders in Cranston. No one community, no one town, no one county, no one city should be overburdened. There should be an equity shared. Cranston should not be considered an epicenter and a joke, a brunt of a joke in this state for where we're hoarding sex offenders, especially when we burden a shelter that really is not able to offer the services that they all need. And by the way, some of them, as far as them being homeless and wandering around, let's all be honest, they don't want to be registered on the registry, number 1. Number 2, they don't want to follow a program with rules and regulations. They would rather freelance it and be able to do drugs and not test it and be able to behave certain ways. So you got to consider those transients and why that's happening too. Not all of them for that reason, but many of them, okay? There are at least 6 states, Idaho, Alabama, New York, Boston, LA, and Connecticut, that have different ways of dealing with clustering of sex offenders. Idaho specifically says no more than 2 per resident. Alabama has it at 1 per resident. New York's wording specifically talks to the burden not being more on any particular city or town than another, which Rep. Almeida is where I understand what you're saying. And that's what we're seeing. There's burdens being put on certain communities or designated where these people are going to be dumped, whether or not we're giving them appropriate services or not. California is no more than 6. But I had wrapped up this with 5159 bill, giving you an example or a model that I thought was very interesting and may be applicable to us and a solution that we can look at, which is in Connecticut. It's called the January Center. Now this is a transitional facility that holds 24 sex offenders. It's intense supervision. It's a locked facility. They're in intense programs. If they escape from this facility, they return to prison. If they do not follow the programs in this facility and take it seriously, because believe me, I've worked with the juvenile population, they're not much different than adults. So they sit there and they can play a game with you like, oh yeah, I'm going along with this, and whatever you say, honey. You know, I'm on board, oh yeah. And they're conning you. And that's not good. You want everybody to be on board. You want them to succeed. That's what you want. That's everybody's goal here. I'm not against success. I'm for success. I like the January Center. It's in Montville, Connecticut. I spoke with Montville, Connecticut. They were frankly shocked at the situation we have here in Rhode Island. I think the comment was at least we don't let our sex offenders wander the streets all day. I was a little offended by that. I'm not the one, with the system we have in place. But I like their model. I think we should take a look at it. It would be part of their pre-release and post-release sentencing. So it would be an agreement in the pre-release for post-release. Do we have to change and rock the boat on the way we're doing things? Yeah, maybe we do. Because look at all these bills that are going in. 1,000 foot near a bus stop and, clustering and motels. And it's really getting out of control. So we really got to try to work together here. I'm not an adversary, I'm not trying to vilify a sex offender and you know, a widow and what, no. We really gotta try to work together here. I did this, I did juvenile reentry. I had youth up to 17 years old who were pedophiles, both boys and girls. This can be done. We can work together and we can put in place successful programs. But do you want to? Because I'm telling you right now, it's costing you a lot more. Last year, $200,000 in fire and rescue runs, not including state police and local law enforcement. This year, $55,000 in 4 months, not including victim costs when something happens. So please, we're going to go down the line with this. You know, we're going to follow up on this. And Rep. Lansky, I can't commend him enough for addressing the issue. I'm hoping more reps like Almeida's voices are heard with his concerns with his district. I totally understand what he's saying. We need to spread this with equity now, okay? There should be one town, when I do a spreadsheet to put together your Google Earth map, and I see that there's no sex offenders there at all. Aren't they lucky? Or they only have one. Aren't they very lucky? Or they have little or no programs for the homeless. Really? Unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Carol? Thank you. Could we hear from